He was a living legend, they all said. The Zildrak's dominion had never known another warrior like General Reshak the Unbeaten. In the old records, his name was associated with the conquest of entire star systems, the subjugation of countless worlds, and a fearsome reputation that had grown for centuries. He towered over most of his own species, a full 3 meters of sleek, scaled muscle covered in dark plating that his people called Vehak Long, or black dragon scales. These living plates had been fused to his body in a ceremony commemorating his first great victory, creating a warrior who was half flesh, half organic armor. His 4 yellow eyes, arranged in pairs on either side of his angular head, studied the swirl of stars visible through the viewing pane of his transport. Wordlessly, he contemplated his next challenge. The Dominion Supreme War Council had sent him to Helios Gate, a neutral space station that served as a meeting point for a variety of interstellar powers, to negotiate with the Human Alliance, that unruly upstart civilization from the spiral arm of the galaxy. He hated negotiations. He considered them a hollow pastime favored by leaders who couldn't or wouldn't wield real power. But times were changing, and it seemed that even the great Zildrak's dominion could not simply crush the humans and move on. That fact alone irritated him beyond measure. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, Captain Kieran James stared pensively at his reflection in a polished metal wall panel aboard the Human Alliance flagship Aurora's Dawn. At just under 2 meters tall, he was lean but muscular, his short, dark hair framing a determined face. He'd lost his left arm at the Battle of Baltora, a conflict that few humans like to discuss because of the horrifying losses inflicted by Zildrak's warships. In place of that arm was a prosthetic of polished alloy, a subtle testament to how close he'd come to death. Some asked him why he didn't opt for the newly available regenerative techniques. He always gave him the same answer: I need the reminder. He flexed the prosthetic slowly. It did not hurt anymore, though it had at first. He had insisted the doctors leave a certain level of tactile sensation intact, so he could truly feel the difference in temperature, in surface textures. In his mind, it kept him close to the memory of what had happened that day. So many died on Baltora's orbital habitat, including his close friend, Dr. Carrie Sullivan. She had been only 28, a brilliant researcher working on cross-species biological synergy. The Zildraks had caught her in one of the outer compartments, pinned by debris, and their next attack obliterated the entire section. Kieran had been just meters away, trying to save her. She was gone in an instant, and his arm with her. That day, he'd sworn that every step he took thereafter would be in service of preventing any more needless slaughter. If that meant negotiations, if that meant forcing himself to remain calm in the presence of the monstrous Reshak, so be it. The official mediator for the humans, Governor Althea Monroe, was an elegant woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Rumor said she could defuse an interstellar crisis with a look, but Kieran knew better. Monroe was talented, yes, but even she would be pressed to keep the peace if Reshak insisted on flexing the Dominion's military muscle. And Reshak, he suspected, would do exactly that. The Helios Gate Station, a marvel of joint engineering by various neutral systems, floated like a silver ring in the star-flecked void. Upon approach, it was evident that Helios Gate was more than just a metal structure. It was a community unto itself, a blend of alien architecture, human additions, and technology gleaned from many corners of the galaxy. Dozens of docking arms stretched outward, shaped like slender arcs that welcomed inbound vessels. Lights ran along each arc, signaling traffic patterns in multiple color-coded languages. Through the Aurora's Dawn's observation windows, Kieran watched dropships and transports arrive from different star nations and corporate blocks. Yet the arrival of the Zildrak's Dominion was always a singular event. As the Dominion dreadnought lowered into its assigned docking berth, its hull bristled with weapons, and the glow of its reactor cores cast ominous, pulsing shadows across the station's outer plating. In the greeting chamber, a small delegation of humans waited in formal attire. Governor Monroe stood at the forefront, wearing a fitted diplomatic uniform. Captain James was just behind her, along with a few aides and representatives from the Alliance's diplomatic corps. Marines in polished exosuits provided a ceremonial honor guard at the perimeter. The heavy doors hissed open, and Reeshak strode forward, flanked by two of his personal guards. He wore partial battle armor over his scaled body, as if the very idea of negotiation required a display of force. He paused before Monroe, tilted his head in a half-bow that was more of a show of courtesy than genuine respect, and introduced himself in a guttural language. An automatic translator system instantly rendered his words into crisp English. "I am General Reeshak of the Zildrax Dominion, herald of our Supreme War Council, conqueror of the 25 theaters, master of Skelm Rift, and honored representative in these proceedings." Monroe, to her credit, did not flinch. Governor Althea Monroe, representing the United Worlds of the Human Alliance. "Welcome to Helios Gate, General." Kieran kept his face impassive, but inwardly, he felt the tension rising. He could sense Reeshak's predatory gaze gliding across each human present, as though evaluating them for weakness. When the general's piercing eyes reached the captain's prosthetic arm, Kieran thought he detected a faint curl of the alien's lip. Then Reeshak turned back to Monroe and said, "I trust your superiors will be grateful we have deigned to speak rather than subdue." Monroe responded calmly, "We come here as equals, General. The galaxy is large enough to accommodate more than one powerful civilization." Reeshak's eyes flicked to Kieran's face. "Is that so? We shall see." The mention of his superiors stung Kieran in a small, private way. Humans are used to these subtle attempts at psychological dominance. Kieran set his jaw and reminded himself that losing his cool would hand the Dominion the moral high ground. He needed that discipline more than ever. A short while later, they moved to a lounge area that opened onto a spectacular vista of Helios Gate's interior superstructure. Walkways suspended over vast cargo bays, entire levels rotating in gentle arcs thanks to partial artificial gravity, and broad observation panels revealing the stars beyond. The opening conversations were polite discussion about the station, about mutual concerns on traffic control, about basic rules for the negotiations. But beneath every sentence, Kieran could feel the tension humming like a high-voltage current. The next day, the formal talks began. Monroe, accompanied by Kieran and other Alliance delegates, sat facing Reeshak and his coterie at a large, curved table in a secure conference hall. Statuary from Helios Gate's founders, tall abstract sculptures, decorated the corners of the chamber. Light panels overhead adjusted to approximate natural sunlight, though the color was slightly off, one of those small quirks that made Helios Gate feel both futuristic and oddly uncomfortable. A Dominion advisor stood to read a formal statement. The Zildrax Dominion claims exclusive rights to resource extraction in the following star systems: Ursus, 22, Zilner Verge, and the Trias Corridor. Any incursion by human alliance vessels into these zones shall be deemed an act of aggression. Monroe exchanged a quick glance with Kieran and another aide. Those systems contain established human colonies and way stations, dating back over 70 standard years. We neither recognized nor had contact with the Dominion at that time. These populations cannot simply be uprooted at your whim. Reeshak emitted a faint clicking sound, a sign of annoyance among his species. Whether you recognize the Dominion is irrelevant. Our star charts date back thousands of years, and they mark those systems for future Dominion expansion. The fact that your kind happened to build habitats there is unfortunate, but you should have paid attention to who rules this quadrant. One of the human aides nearly stood up in anger, but caught herself. Monroe's diplomatic voice remained measured. We propose a joint control or a shared administration, at least until a final treaty can be hammered out. We are willing to negotiate resource rights, but we will not cede entire colonies and families to your authority. That is out of the question. Reeshak locked eyes with her. Then we shall see how far negotiations go. The day wore on, a delicate dance of proposals and counterproposals, shifting topics from trade routes to defense pacts, from scientific exchanges to boundaries of neutral space. Kieran mostly stayed silent, scanning Dominion body language, searching for any sign that Reeshak or his assistants might be open to reason. He did not see much. The Dominion representatives seemed confident that, were it not for meddling from other star nations, they would have already crushed humanity's push into space. And in part, that might have been true. The Dominion's technology was ancient and robust. However, humanity had proven time and again that they innovated rapidly, turning weaknesses into strengths. The conflict had reached a stalemate precisely because humans adapted faster than Dominion strategists ever expected. During a recess, Monroe stepped out to converse with some station officials about scheduling. Kieran found himself standing near a panoramic viewport that gave a breathtaking view of ships docking and departing. He was joined, unexpectedly, by Reeshak himself. The hulking general stepped closer, arms folded, letting out a deep rumble that might have been the equivalent of a cleared throat. Kieran forced himself not to tense. "Tell me, Captain," Reeshak said, "what does it feel to rely on that metal arm of yours? Do you miss flesh?" Kieran kept his voice even. "The prosthetic is an advantage in many circumstances, General." "An advantage?" Reeshak tilted his head, studying the mechanical limb. "I suppose your kind must cling to illusions of advantage wherever you can find them." "I'm not ashamed of what happened to me," Kieran replied. "It's a reminder of the cost of conflict, something your Dominion has inflicted more than once upon us. Conflict is how this galaxy has shaped civilizations for eons." Reeshak's double pupils dilated. "Your species pretends it can negotiate its way out of that primal truth. You're too new to these stars to comprehend real authority." Kieran held his gaze. "We've comprehended it enough to hold our own in multiple engagements." The corners of Reeshak's mouth curled slightly, a half-smirk that exposed a hint of sharp teeth. "Yes, at Baltimore Station, I believe. We lost a minor cruiser group to your explosive sabotage. Perhaps you take pride in that." Kieran's breath caught momentarily. Baltimore was no mere sabotage. The Zildrax had attacked a civilian orbital habitat without warning. "We only did what was necessary to protect our people," Kieran said carefully. "We had no choice. No choice but to kill Dominion warriors in a humiliating ambush," Reeshak countered. "I've read the reports, Captain. You were there, and so was a female scientist. Dr. Carrie Sullivan, if I recall." He paused just enough to watch Kieran's reaction. "She perished, I believe." Kieran stiffened. The memory of Carrie's final moments flooded him. "She did. Tragic," Reeshak said in a tone that implied he found it anything but such a short life. Perhaps she was not ready to face the realities of war. A sharp spike of anger flared inside Kieran. He stared up at Reeshak, who stood half a meter taller. "She was a civilian researcher, not a combatant. You bombarded the station even when it was clear there were unarmed personnel present." Reeshak shrugged, the plating on his shoulders making a rasping sound. "Collateral damage is unavoidable when lesser species encroach on Dominion territory." Kieran forced down the urge to strike him. "She was working on research that could have benefited everyone." "Everyone," Reeshak repeated, as though tasting a new word. "I doubt it. But I suppose humans see cosmic significance in each individual life, no matter how small or ordinary. That is your weakness." Kieran's jaw clenched. He could practically feel the ghost of Carrie urging him to fight back. But a confrontation here would compromise the entire negotiation. He took a breath. "Or perhaps it's our strength, General. Maybe someday you'll learn that." He turned and strode away, ignoring the Dominion soldier's low chuckle that followed him. In the corridor beyond, he steadied himself. The mention of Carrie brought a sense of raw grief that threatened to consume him. Yet he reminded himself that nothing would be gained from an impulsive attack. He had to remain focused. Let Reeshak's insult stand, at least for now. Kieran promised himself there would be a time and place for a reckoning. By the second day of talks, the negotiations had already begun to stall. The Zildrax Dominion insisted on total control over resources in the disputed sectors. The humans demanded at least joint oversight, since their colonists had built entire settlements there. Governor Monroe attempted to thread the needle by offering time-limited agreements or resource-sharing deals, but the Dominion refused to compromise. It became clear that Reeshak was pushing for an excuse to declare the talks a failure, so his war council could justify renewed military aggression. Rumors circulated among the station staff that Zildrak's reinforcements were already en route, waiting for a reason to strike. Inside the conference hall, tension crackled. People spoke less, glancing at one another with wary eyes. Monroe repeatedly tried to steer the dialogue toward a middle ground, but Reeshak's voice boomed with a combination of scorn and amusement. Governor Monroe, these proposals of yours might appeal to smaller species that kneel to your alliance out of desperation, but the Zildrak's dominion has a lineage stretching back thousands of years. Our star chart's detail claims older than your civilization itself. Monroe gave a tight smile. If our attempts at compromise are insufficient, General, perhaps you have a constructive suggestion of your own. Reeshak's eyes slid to Kieran, then back to Monroe. Constructive, yes. But you humans will call it barbaric, no doubt. We are open to hearing it, Monroe said warily. The general leaned forward. Among the Zildraks, there is a traditional way to settle disputes when the question of dominion or domain cannot be resolved in words. A symbolic duel, overseen by witnesses, to test the resolve of each side. Non-lethal, a demonstration that those who speak so boldly can back their words with physical courage. A hush settled over the room. Kieran's heart thudded. He could see the trap. Reeshak wanted to bully them into a ritual fight, likely planning to humiliate the humans by showing how a single Zildrak champion could crush any foe. Or if the humans declined, it would be used as propaganda. The lesser race refused to stand up for itself. Monroe cleared her throat. I'm not certain if that custom is relevant here, General. We have many lives and territories at stake. A single duel cannot resolve the fate of entire star systems. It would not be decisive in that sense, Reeshak acknowledged, but it would reveal how serious you truly are. Do you dare risk your body or pride? Or are you content with words alone? And perhaps, he added, letting his voice carry the faintest mocking note, we could find some measure of respect for each other afterward. Monroe opened her mouth to object, but Kieran spoke up before she could. I accept. She flashed him a startled look. Captain. It's all right, Governor, Kieran said evenly, meeting Reeshak's gaze. General, if a duel is what you want, I'll represent the human alliance. Reeshak's grin widened, revealing rows of pointed teeth. Are you certain, Captain? I would not wish to damage that prosthetic of yours. Unless you prefer we set more accommodating terms. Kieran forced a calm he didn't entirely feel. I need no accommodations. Monroe tried to interject. We do not sanction violence as part of this negotiation. But Reeshak was already standing. Then we have a duel. We shall arrange a space in Helios Gate's cargo rings. Let all present see how the humans fight or fall. Kieran caught Monroe's eye, silently asking for her trust. She hesitated. She could certainly forbid this, but doing so might make the entire negotiation collapse. Reluctantly, she gave him the slightest nod, then signaled to the Helios Gate officials that they had a serious matter to oversee. Reeshak strode off, his personal aides hurrying behind him. A flurry of excited chatter burst among the station staff and the diplomatic onlookers. The Helios Gate authorities, under immense pressure from both sides, cleared a wide cargo bay and set up a marked circle on the deck. Overhead lights glowed in a tight focus around that circle, leaving the rest of the chamber in dim shadow. Elevated walkways and catwalks gave a vantage point for spectators, though security forced people to maintain a safe distance. Medical personnel from both species were on standby, as if preparing for a public demonstration that might turn savage. Word spread quickly. The cargo ring was soon crowded with onlookers from various starfaring peoples who happened to be at Helios Gate. Everyone wanted to see how a human would fare against Reeshak the Unbeaten, the legend of the Dominion. Monroe approached Kieran before the duel, her brow etched with worry. Captain, this is madness. He is at least half again your size, not to mention the plating on his body. You saw how strong he looked and we know from intelligence that he's genetically enhanced for combat. I can't allow you to commit suicide on behalf of the Alliance. Kieran straightened, testing the joints in his prosthetic arm. Governor, I know it looks impossible, but I can't back out. He openly mocked us, mocked everything we stand for. If we walk away, that's exactly what he wants. An excuse to claim we're weak and proceed with an all-out assault. She lowered her voice. All the same, a duel won't guarantee a peaceful settlement. He might just kill you and claim victory. Kieran's face was set. He said non-lethal. Even so, I'm not naive. I know he could kill me if he wanted, but I won't run. Monroe sighed. At least let the doctors give you a protective exosuit. Too obvious, he said quietly. He'll see it as an insult or a sign of cowardice. I'll go as I am. Monroe swallowed hard and then reached out, touching his shoulder. I can't stop you, can I? Kieran shook his head. Trust me, I've done my research. She took a breath, sensing he was referring to Carrie's research. All right, Captain, do what you must. In a staging area off to one side, Reeshak donned minimal ceremonial armor plates that attached to his living scales. He allowed a medic to check a few readings, though he didn't seem concerned. Standing near him, one of his aides tried to express caution. General, do you think it wise to fight personally? The War Council. You dare question me? Reeshak snarled. This is tradition. Our strength must be put on display. If these humans are so bold as to stand against us, let them see what fate awaits them. Of course, General, the aide murmured, bowing his head. When everything was prepared, an official from Helios Gate stepped forward and announced the terms. This duel is to be fought within the marked circle. No lethal weapons permitted. No strikes to vital organs. Victory is claimed if one combatant yields, is rendered unconscious, or is forced beyond the circle boundary. Both sides acknowledge they will abide by the outcome as a symbolic demonstration of sincerity. Do you agree? Reeshak rumbled his assent. Kieran nodded, eyes focused. The official raised a hand. Begin. Reeshak moved first, a surge of muscle and speed that belied his massive frame. Kieran sidestepped just in time, his boots scraping on the metal deck. He'd studied the recordings of Zildrak's movements. They favored direct assaults, seeking to overwhelm. Reeshak was said to be the pinnacle of that style, a whirlwind of force. Kieran had to avoid letting the general gain a solid grapple or land a decisive blow. The next flurry of attacks came faster. Reeshak's scaly arms lashed out, clawed fingers aiming to grab hold of Kieran. The human twisted aside, blocking with his prosthetic. A clang echoed, and Kieran's mechanical limb absorbed the impact with only a slight shudder. Reeshak, seeing the arm hold firm, let out a derisive snort. You think technology will save you? We've shattered entire fleets of your precious machines. Kieran said nothing, focusing on footwork. He launched a counterstrike, jabbing upward at Reeshak's side, just beneath a gap in the plating. The blow glanced off, but the general grimaced, noticing that Kieran knew exactly where to aim. Reeshak retaliated by whipping his tail around, a thick, scaled extremity that slammed toward Kieran's torso. Kieran barely managed to pivot away, the tail whistling past with lethal velocity. That was the sort of hit that could knock a man across the room. Sweat began to bead on Kieran's forehead. The cargo bay was warm, and the tension in the air added pressure. Reeshak pressed his advantage, bullying Kieran to the circle's edge. The spectators murmured. From above, on a catwalk, Monroe watched with eyes wide, while Dominion observers leered, expecting Kieran to fall at any moment. Reeshak lunged with a powerful thrust, hooking an arm around Kieran's right shoulder. Kieran planted his prosthetic against the alien's chest and tried to push free. They were locked in a half-grapple, and Kieran felt a tremor of dread at the raw strength in Reeshak's grip. The general used his greater height to twist down, forcing Kieran to one knee. The crowd gasped. Is that all? Reeshak demanded. His four eyes glowed with savage delight. I've faced beasts on the Skelm Rift that put up a better fight. Kieran gritted his teeth, using the moment to shift his lower body. Reeshak's momentum was pressing downward, so Kieran tucked his left leg beneath him and pushed up with every bit of force he could muster, pivoting sideways. he managed to slip free, rolling away to gain a few meters of distance. Breathing heavily, he scanned for an opening. Reeshak chuckled ominously. Run, human. Delay the inevitable. Kieran steadied himself. On the margin of his mind, images of Carrie Sullivan danced. Her laughter, her earnest desire to see multiple species collaborate for mutual benefit, her unwavering belief that the Dominion could be engaged peacefully if only they understood each other's biology and culture. After her death, Kieran had devoted countless hours to analyzing Carrie's notes. She had mapped the nerve clusters of Zildrak's muscle groups, discovered that certain angles of impact could disrupt their neural impulses. The Dominion had never needed to study their own vulnerabilities in such detail, believing themselves nearly invincible. This was the knowledge Kieran had come to test today. Reeshak rushed again, fainting high, then going low, trying to sweep Kieran's legs out. Kieran jumped, slamming down with his prosthetic elbow onto the base of Reeshak's thick neck plating. The angle was not perfect, but it caused Reeshak to grunt and stagger. With renewed courage, Kieran pressed forward, landing a series of quick strikes at the juncture of scale and muscle. The watchers saw Reeshak flinch, as though these blows carried a sting beyond normal punches. The general reeled back. Then, a dark scowl crossed his face. Trickery. So you've discovered our nerve clusters. Learned them from that worthless woman you lost. Kieran's chest tightened. Her name was Carrie Sullivan. Reeshak sneered, launching a vicious strike that hammered into Kieran's torso. Kieran's back hit the deck, knocking the air out of his lungs. Nausea welled up. He'd underestimated the speed of that blow. Reeshak stood over him, tail lashing side to side. The towering figure leaned down, speaking in a low hiss that only Kieran could hear clearly. Her name doesn't matter. She was just one more casualty among many. Whatever pitiful research she left behind will not save you now. Kieran heard a roaring in his ears, an echo of rage and grief. He managed to roll aside, just as Reeshak's foot came down in a stomp that threatened to pin him. Gasping, Kieran scrambled upright. He felt a bruise spreading across his ribs. The Dominion was unstoppable, or so they always claimed. But that arrogance might be a weakness. Kieran had to harness the fury that Reeshak's words ignited, not let it consume him. For a moment, he recalled Carrie's bright smile, her eyes shining with ideas for peaceful interspecies synergy. If she believed in the potential for knowledge to overcome brute force, how could he fail to try? He steadied himself, forcing his breathing to slow. Reeshak circled him. You stand alone, Captain. None of your peers can help you. No cunning sabotage. No clever exosuit advantage. Just you and me. Kieran locked eyes with him. That's enough. He lunged forward, feinting a blow toward Reeshak's right flank. As Reeshak moved to counter, Kieran abruptly shifted and drove the reinforced fingers of his prosthetic into the cluster of nerves below Reeshak's left shoulder. The angle was perfect. Reeshak let out a bellow of pain, staggering. Kieran dropped low, aiming a side kick at the back of the general's knee joint, another spot Carrie's notes had highlighted. Reeshak half collapsed, trying to pivot, but Kieran was already surging up behind him, hooking his arm around the scaly neck. He braced his metal hand against the nerve cluster near the base of Reeshak's skull. For an instant, the cargo bay was silent except for the sound of Reeshak's labored breathing. The unstoppable warrior was on one knee, pinned by a human half his size, trembling as if a flick of Kieran's wrist might sever the signals in his spine. Kieran's breath came in ragged gasps, but his grip was sure. Yield, Kieran hissed. Reeshak tried to rise, but Kieran tightened the hold, pressing painfully. A wave of neural feedback shot through Reeshak's body. He snarled, tail lashing violently across the deck, but he could not throw Kieran off. Then came the hush of stunned observers, Zildraks and human alike, watching their champion subdued. For a heartbeat, Reeshak's eyes burned with defiance. Then his posture slumped by a fraction. I yield, he rasped, his voice resonating with disbelief and outrage. Kieran released him and stepped back. The official quickly called, the match is over. The duel is won by Captain Kieran James of the Human Alliance. A burst of murmured exclamations erupted on the walkways. Monroe visibly sagged in relief. The Dominion contingent exchanged shocked looks, uncertain how to react. As Rees-Hack struggled to his feet, he refused the assistance of his aides, but he swayed slightly, as though disoriented. Kieran stood with chest heaving, forcing himself not to show how close he was to collapsing from sheer adrenaline. Rees-Hack stared at him for a long moment. Finally, he spoke in a low tone. "You used knowledge of our own bodies against me. That kind of knowledge is not taught outside our dominion. So you learned from Dr. Carrie Sullivan," Kieran said quietly. "She studied your species, hoping to find ways for us to cooperate peacefully. She documented everything she discovered. You might call it worthless, but if the Dominion had listened, perhaps we wouldn't be here." Rees-Hack's face was torn between fury and something that looked eerily close to regret. He opened his mouth to retort, then shut it again. The ring around them cleared as the official parted the crowd. Kieran stepped away, unwilling to gloat but clearly determined to stand by the outcome. A short hush filled the bay, until the watchers realized the ceremony was concluded. Then the human side began to file out, along with station guards, while the Dominion folks parted to let Rees-Hack pass. He strode stiffly, ignoring the startled expressions from those who had never seen him bested. The next day, Helios Gate was abuzz with rumors. The unstoppable general had been stopped. The humans, once dismissed, had proven they could learn and adapt. The entire dynamic of the negotiations shifted. Now, as the parties reconvened in the main conference hall, Rees-Hack arrived wearing simpler attire, his steps less swaggering than before. He settled into his seat, scanning the assembled humans. His gaze paused on Kieran, who stood near Governor Monroe, looking battered but upright. Then he inclined his head ever so slightly, as though acknowledging the man who had humbled him. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Monroe cleared her throat. "Shall we resume the discussion of resource rights and territorial claims?" Rees-Hack nodded. "We shall." One of his aides unrolled a datapad, fumbling to find the correct file. The Dominion requests continued conversation on control of strategic jump gates in the Ursus 22 region. Monroe gestured to Kieran and a cartographer. They brought up a holographic display, detailing proposed lines of control that would give both sides access to certain shipping lanes. "These routes," Monroe began, "represent a fair compromise, offering the Dominion free passage for trade and security, while preserving legitimate human colonies. We could discuss co-management of resources." Rees-Hack lifted a hand to halt her. He glanced at Kieran. "No more half measures. The Dominion must see genuine benefit in cooperating. We do not yield lightly, nor do we do so for illusions." Monroe's jaw tightened. "Our intention is not to have illusions, General. We want a peace that respects the existence of both our peoples." Rees-Hack studied the hologram. "In the past, we have found that peace is no teacher. Conquest built our empire, and we have grown complacent in these long centuries of rule. We encountered your species, and you fought in ways we did not anticipate. Perhaps your fresh approach is instructive." Kieran caught the slight shift in Rees-Hack's expression and remembered that, after the duel, the general had stared at him with something akin to shock. The Dominion prided itself on unstoppable might, but the humans had turned knowledge, cunning, and unwavering will into a force that could crack even the hardest scaly shell. If that forced Rees-Hack to reconsider, maybe the old ways could indeed change. One of the human aides nodded. "We have scientists and engineers who'd be happy to collaborate with Zildrak specialists. We can share data that improves our chances of exploring resource sites without destroying entire ecosystems." Another Dominion advisor raised a hand in cautious inquiry. "And what would the Dominion gain in return for such collaboration?" Kieran suppressed a grim smile. Collaboration. Carrie Sullivan would have wept for joy to hear that word coming from a Dominion mouth. Monroe answered smoothly. "We'd gain stable borders, less risk of conflict, and the potential for technological exchange." Rees-Hack exhaled through his nostrils, the sound like a hiss. Technological exchange. You believe you have something to teach us, even though we have studied the stars for millennia? We do, Kieran said, speaking up for the first time in this session. We can learn from each other, not because one side is purely superior, but because there's strength in differing perspectives. Our differences led to violence. They can also lead to breakthroughs. No one replied immediately, but the tension in the room felt different. Less like a coiled spring ready to snap, more like the hush before something new can take shape. The negotiations continued for many hours, with no one proclaiming a perfect resolution. Yet everyone felt a subtle shift. Reeshak occasionally demanded larger concessions, and Monroe fought for every inch, but the general never again repeated that the humans should simply bow to the Dominion. He still possessed the fierceness of a proud warrior, but the thin veneer of scorn had receded, replaced by a pragmatic caution. After the session, Reeshak remained behind in the emptying conference hall. He stared at the holographic star map, apparently lost in thought. Kieran, about to leave with Monroe, paused. He hesitated, then walked over to Reeshak, ignoring the alarmed glance from one of the Dominion aides. He kept a respectful distance. Reeshak glanced at him. "What is it, Captain?" Kieran took a slow breath. "I want you to know something. Carrie Sullivan dedicated her life to bridging the gap between species. She found beauty in the small details that unite us despite our differences. She wasn't naive. She understood your empire was dangerous, but she believed knowledge could foster respect. That's why she documented your nerve clusters in such detail. Not to create a weapon, but to understand." For a moment, Reeshak said nothing. Then he folded his arms, every inch the imposing figure he'd always been, though somehow less hostile. "It is unfortunate that she died before we could meet her in a more civilized way." Kieran's throat tightened. "Yes, it is." He decided not to mention that the Dominion's own bombs had sealed that fate. He knew Reeshak was well aware. A loaded silence hovered between them. Then Reeshak spoke again, his voice lower. "I have been fighting all my life, Captain, always proving my superiority in single combat. When I saw your prosthetic, I believed you were but a broken soldier, clinging to scraps of strength. I was wrong to dismiss you." Kieran didn't quite smile. "I was wrong to assume you had no honor." Reeshak snorted softly, an ambiguous sound. "Your species is irritatingly resilient. Perhaps we can find a way to direct that resilience constructively." With a curt nod, Kieran turned to leave. He could sense that the Dominion warlord was still grappling with the new reality. As he exited, Monroe joined him, whispering quietly, "I never thought I'd see Reeshak voluntarily remain in a negotiation hall. Whatever you've done, Captain, it's changing the conversation." Kieran let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for days. Let's hope it changes it for the better. In the corridors of Helios Gate, rumors about the duel spread like wildfire. Kieran had become a reluctant symbol of human determination, particularly for other star nations that had felt the Dominion's heavy hand. Some congratulated him. Others cautioned that a single victory did not mean the Dominion would truly yield. Kieran thanked them all politely, but his mind was on one simple fact. For the first time since Baltora, he felt that Carrie's death had not been in vain. Her research had saved him, but beyond that, it had forced the Dominion's greatest champion to see that humans could not be dismissed. He hoped that was enough to alter the course of future battles. On the third day, the station administrators arranged a formal signing of a provisional framework agreement. It was not a final treaty. Too many details remained unresolved, but it established a ceasefire, recognized existing human colonies, and outlined joint commissions to investigate resource-sharing protocols. There was also an article inviting scientific exchanges, though Reeshak had insisted on some limiting clauses. Nonetheless, it was a start. Everyone gathered in the station's Grand Assembly Hall, a place rarely used except for major interstellar summits. Under tall, vaulted ceilings, banners of various species fluttered in artificial breezes. At the center stood a wide dais with two ornate tables, one for the Dominion, one for the Human Alliance. Monroe stepped up to the microphone and spoke with the confident authority she was known for. She summarized the main points of the agreement, the spirit of cooperation, the desire for peace. There was polite applause, cautious yet tinged with optimism. Then Rees-Hack took the podium, looming over it, scanning the audience. He spoke in the Dominion language, letting the translator convert his words into multiple tongues simultaneously. I stand before you not as a conqueror, but as a representative of the Supreme War Council, which has decided that the old ways are insufficient for the current reality. We are not here to yield everything we have built, nor to apologize for our history. But we are here to acknowledge that conflict alone may not serve our future. He paused, eyes flicking to Kieran. I have faced your champion, and I know that your species possesses a rare audacity. Let this agreement be a test, a first step. Whether it leads to deeper understanding or to more war is up to us both. Quiet murmurs followed, then the signing took place. Monroe signed for the Human Alliance, Rees-Hack for the Dominion. Kieran watched from the sidelines, feeling a swirl of relief and lingering tension. He knew that one piece of paper, or digital equivalent, would not magically repair centuries of Dominion aggression. But it was a foothold, a chance to save lives. Perhaps in some distant day, no more scientists like Carrie Sullivan would be vaporized by a stray barrage, and the Zildrax might add new chapters to their grand history that didn't revolve around subjugation. Later, near the docking bays, the Dominion retinue prepared to depart. Rees-Hack, still the imposing figure, but slightly more subdued, approached Kieran. The bustle of departing delegations created a background hum, affording them a small pocket of relative privacy. Captain, Rees-Hack said, tilting his head, our transport is leaving soon, but the War Council expects a full report. I intend to include the details of our duel. Kieran met his gaze levelly. I have no objections. A brief moment of silence stretched. Then Rees-Hack lowered his voice. There's one question that troubles me. If your Dr. Sullivan did not wish to create a weapon, why did you learn how to exploit our nerve clusters so thoroughly? Kieran answered softly. After Baltora, many of us studied every scrap of data about your physiology so we wouldn't be caught unprepared again. I specifically learned her findings out of a personal need for closure. The day she died, I was powerless to stop it. I wanted never to feel that helpless again. Rees-Hack's posture shifted. Powerlessness. We Zildrax abhor it. I suppose we share that much in common. Are you satisfied with your closure now? Kieran exhaled. In a way, yes. She believed in peaceful cooperation, and ironically, it was her research that let me defeat you. That victory forced these negotiations to a new place. So in the end, what she left behind mattered. The general nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Her name was Carrie Sullivan. It was neither a question nor an insult this time, just a statement. Kieran blinked, then gave a small nod. Yes, it was. Without further ceremony, Rees-Hack stepped back. May your alliance prove worthy of its ambitions, Captain, but beware. If we ever find that your species uses this treaty to undermine us, the Dominion's response will be swift. Kieran did not flinch. We'll keep our word. I hope you keep yours. With that, Rees-Hack departed. His guards fell on his step, and the massive doors to the docking area slid shut behind them. Kieran watched them go, the faint echo of footsteps fading into the hum of machinery and chatter. He felt drained, physically and emotionally, but also strangely hopeful. Carrie's memory had been a driving force, an impetus for him to stand firm. And he had. The war was not over. The galaxy was still dangerous and uncertain, but at least there was a fragile new understanding. Monroe approached him, placing a hand lightly on his shoulder. Well done, Captain. Thank you for what you did. I know it was personal, and it was also for the good of everyone. He let himself smile a bit, thinking of how Carrie would have rolled her eyes at such formality. She deserved better than she got, he said, voice hushed. But maybe this is a step toward ensuring others don't share her fate. Monroe nodded. We still have a long road. The Dominion's older leadership might see this as a sign of weakness. We have to be prepared. But at least for now, fewer people will die. Kieran slid his prosthetic hand into a coat pocket, feeling the metal joints shift. That's all I want. The final hours on Helios Gate were a whirlwind. The humans packed up their diplomatic materials, exchanged a flurry of new contact protocols with station officials, and fielded countless questions from curious reporters and observers. Kieran gave minimal interviews, not wanting to glamorize the notion of single combat. Each time, he tried to emphasize that the only reason he had succeeded was because of careful study, because a brilliant researcher named Carrie Sullivan had believed knowledge could surmount fear and violence. Some reporters found that angle too intellectual, preferring the sensational story of an underdog champion toppling Titan. But Kieran stuck to his message, hopeful that at least a few out there would take note. Finally, he boarded the Aurora's Dawn with Monroe and their entourage. As the ship disengaged from the docking arm, Kieran felt the subtle shift of inertia. He gazed one last time at the Helios Gate from a porthole, thinking how ironically appropriate the station's name was, like a gateway to a new phase of galactic relations. Or perhaps that was just his wistful imagination. The engines hummed to life, propelling them back toward Alliance space, and soon the swirling stars filled the viewport. In his cabin, Kieran sank onto a bunk, exhaustion washing over him. He flexed the prosthetic, thinking of how it had locked with Hack's scaly forearm in that final, desperate hold. On a small shelf was a framed photograph of him and Carrie from a pre-launch party before the Baltora expedition. She was laughing, an arm around his shoulder, eyes full of excitement for the possibilities of bridging species differences. He stared at that photo a long while. "Your name matters," he said quietly to the empty air. "Your work mattered, and you've changed the course of things even after you've gone." He let his eyes close, lulled by the gentle vibrations of the ship. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings, more strategy sessions to follow up on the provisional treaty. Hack might remain a threat, or perhaps he'd become the wedge that opened the Dominion to a broader future. Either way, this was a victory that Kieran would remember not for his own pride, but as a testament to the memory of a dead friend who'd once been mocked by a living legend. He slept, dreaming of starlight and the echoes of footsteps in a cargo bay, the unstoppable Dominion halted by the persistent will of a single, grieving man. And somewhere in those dreams, Carrie's laughter reminded him that hope could live alongside sorrow, that knowledge was never truly buried, and that the greatest battles were sometimes won by the smallest acts of remembrance.